Good to be sober. Thank you, Devin, for being persistent and getting me to come up to Prescott Valley and speak. I wish I was there personally. I'd like to come up and be with my mom up in Prescott, but unfortunately, I'm in week 12 of lockdown. So it's going to be, hopefully, I'll get up there for September 27th at the VA. But in any event, what I'm going to talk about tonight is what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And I see that there are a lot of young people. I'm sure there are a lot of newcomers, so I'll keep it succinct, direct, and to the point. I was born here. I'm in Chicago. I was born here in Chicago. When I was a year old, I was adopted out of the Chicago Foundlings Home. And the couple that adopted me had been repeatedly denied adoption rights. My dad was a World War II combat veteran. He was 19 years old when he landed at Normandy, fought his way down through France, Germany, up into Upper Austria. He was one of the first American soldiers into the Gunskirchen concentration camp in Upper Austria. He had what probably would be defined today as post-traumatic stress syndrome. First 14 years of my life, his secondary purpose, I think, was to kill me. The love I got from him was at the end of a pair of fists. And my adoptive mother was a bipolar, schizophrenic, manic depressive, subject to frequent and periodic psychotic episodes. And she spent a good part of my childhood in and out of psychiatric wards and therapist's office. But you know, I had an okay childhood, other than the usual, getting beat up. And when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I got into my family's liquor cabinet, and I found that I could make everything change at the drop of a drink. And I became a devoted fan of my father's liquor cabinet. And that went on through, the early years of high school, the periodic young things like, coming out of a blackout with the Homewood, Illinois Police Department, had me naked in the back of their car on New Year's Eve because they found me naked on top of a 20-foot water fountain in a snowstorm with a half a bottle of Dewar Scotch in my hand, trying to get closer to God. Things like that just worked out. One particularly bad beating, my father had me pinned under his knees on my shoulders. My mother's hanging off of his shoulders, screaming, "You're going to kill him, you're going to kill him, you're going to kill him." Little light bulb went off in my head, and the thought occurred to me that he was trying to kill me and I needed to leave. So I left, and I moved in. I was 14 years old. I moved in with the older sister of a classmate of mine who lived in Oak Park, Illinois. She was, I think, 19. And after a week of being just subjected to all the indignities that an older woman puts on a young man like me, I just got tired of it, and I moved out. And I moved into the Lawson YMCA Transit Hotel on the north side of Chicago on Chicago Avenue, where I could keep up my drinking. And I had this habit. I got a job. I worked at a camera store. I was a runner. I would run cameras and electronics between the stores. I was a kid. And when I'd get drunk, in the transit, in the YMCA hotel, I lived on the 12th or 13th floor. And I had my own room, but it was a common bathroom. And this was a seedy place with a lot of transits, a lot of men transits. And, you didn't really want to get cornered in the bathroom. So I'd get my half quarts of old style, and when I was done with them, I just, rather than go down to the bathroom, I'd piss in the bottles until I had all 6 or 8 of them filled up, and then I'd wrap them up in the bag and throw them out the window. Well, my apartment faced the front side of the building, so one night I almost apparently hit some pedestrians. They sent security up, hauled me out, found out I was a minor, tossed me out of the hotel. And I moved into a dumpster behind 1220 North State Parkway. And I lived in the dumpster and drank and, hooked up with the street people and the cooks at Chester's Pizza who'd feed me, take care of me, get me liquor, and, started peddling my ass on the streets of Chicago, and just lived on the streets and survived and drank and drank and drank. At this point, the way my thinking was, is I got to the point in my drinking where if somebody gave me a $5 bill, I didn't recognize a $5 bill because beer was 50 cents a can. It was 10 beers. A $10 bill was 20 beers. A $20 bill was 40 beers. That's how my thinking was. And, I scamped around. When I turned 17 and a half, I kind of ran out of options. And I went down to the Armed Forces recruiting station on Clark Street, and I walked into the Marine Corps recruiting station. I had hair down to my shoulders. I was skinny and I was eager, and I walked in and I walked up to the guy's desk and I said, "Sergeant, I'd like some information about joining the Marine Corps." And he said, "Young man, I want you to walk out that door, tuck in your hair, tuck in your shirt, adjust your gig line, tighten your belt, come in, salute me, stand at attention and say, 'Sergeant, I want to be a Marine.'" I said, "Fuck you." And I walked out the door. I got in the elevator, went down the elevator, the door opened up, and right in front of me, I'm looking at a 6'6", blackest United States Army Sergeant First Class Special Forces recruiter, Sergeant First Class Oliver. And he looked down at me and said, "Young man, where are you going?" I told him what had happened, and he said, "What do you want?" I'm going through the ashtray out in the lobby, because that's where I got my cigarettes. I'm going through the ashtray in the sand, pulling butts out. He offered me a Kool. That's how I started smoking Kools rather than Marlboros. And he said, "What do you want to do with your life?" I said, "I want to go to Germany." 72 hours later, I was standing in my boxer shorts with a shaved head, with a 75-pound duffel on my shoulder at the top of Tank Hill, Alpha Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Brigade at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, with another very tall African-American sergeant telling me he was my mother, father, wife, God for the next 12 weeks. And that was the longest enforced period of sobriety I had between the time I was 14 years old and the time I was 25. And made it through there, went to infantry school at Fort Benning, went through airborne training at Fort Bragg, and then I was waiting for my orders. I was supposed to go to the 509th Airborne Infantry in Vicenza, Italy. And I was waiting for my orders, and I got called to the brigade commander's office. And I thought maybe they'd finally caught up with me. And he called me in and he said, "Well, we were looking at your test scores. We want you to take a test." And I said, "Sir?" And he said, "It's a test to see how you learn a foreign language and if you have the ability or the aptitude." I said, "Sure." So I go down to this Quonset hut, got a sergeant, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, says you got 3 hours to take this test. It's self-paced. You can't unseal the booklet until you start the tape recorder. You got 3 hours, start. I unsealed the booklet, and fuck me if it wasn't Esperanto. Esperanto was an artificial language that was invented at the turn of the 19th to 20th century by a Polish oculist. It was going to be the scientific universal language. When I was in high school, I picked up one of these how-to signet little books, and it was Esperanto, and I taught myself the basics of Esperanto. So I did really great on the test. I finished it early, got called back to the brigade commander's office, and he said, "You did well on the test. How would you like to go to the Presidio of Monterey, California for a year and learn Russian?" I said, "I'm in." Off I was, and that's where I really started to drink like a professional. I made it through the Russian course ahead of my security background investigation. It took them a long time to do background investigations back then, and I had a lot of blocks in my history. So they put me through the Polish course, and I finished that. And drinking all the time, doing a lot of drinking, prodigious drinking. I got caught up one night, and it was. I don't know what happened, but I woke up and I was all wet, and I was on a mattress with a green blanket over me, and I thought, okay, that's good. At least I know I made it back to the barracks. And then I heard that unmistakable clanging of steel against steel, and I thought, shit. I pulled that blanket up and I looked and I saw the bars and I saw the closed circuit television camera, and I just sat up and I pissed all over myself, and and my head hurts. The top of my head's got a bump on it, and I'm thinking, what did I do? What did I do? And I'm sitting there sweating, and this burly sergeant comes and he opens up the door and he says, "You ready to go home?" And I said, "Go home?" He said, "Yep." "You want to go home?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Okay, I'm going to cut you loose." On the way out, I'd stopped by the blotter desk and I said, "Excuse me, but how did I get here?" And he took out the blotter report. It says at 2:23 a.m., the highway patrol find you in the middle of United States Highway 1 with a full mug of beer, and you were trying to ignite it with a cigarette lighter, and you told the reporting officer that you were an Army nuclear physicist and you just discovered an untapped source of energy, but you couldn't get your lighter to work. And we thought it would be best if we brought you in. So there you have it. I went right up back to the barracks, opened up the telephone book, and looked up Alcoholics Anonymous. And that very day, I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at the Alvarado Alano Club in Monterey, California. And I walked in and I sat down, and everybody was clean cut, and they were all men, and it was all nice, and they were talking about a higher power, and they gave me this big book. And it just didn't seem like I was going to be a fit. So I left after the meeting was over. I thanked them. They told me to keep coming back. And I walked down the street to the Deep Six Lounge, walked in, got completely wasted, went back up to the barracks. Time passed by. My drinking progressed. I got sent to Germany. Finally, I went through the German speakers course. I got my security clearance. They put me on a Pan Am flight, and I went off to Germany. And I wound up working as a Russian-Polish interrogator on a general staff for a 3-star general. And my drinking got out of control. I was, first I was in Frankfurt, Germany, and then I was sent down to another 3-star billet in a place called Kaiserslautern, Germany. And that's where my drinking really took a step. You know, a couple of years I was in Kaiserslautern, and I wouldn't go to sleep. I would pass out. And I wouldn't wake up, I would come to. And it was that simple. And I had a terrible problem. I wet the bed a lot. I would pass out, piss the bed, wake up, my mattress was soaked. Well, by then I was a sergeant, and I had my own room, and I was on the 4th floor of the barracks. And at each end of this barracks, there was what we called a transit room for soldiers that would come to Germany. They'd be sent to our headquarters for reassignment to subordinate units. And the NCOs would stay in these transit rooms. Each one of those transit rooms had 24 bunks, 48 bunks in each room, 96 mattresses in total. Over a period of 2 years, when I pissed my mattress, I'd flip it over. When I pissed it again, I'd take it down the next morning. I'd take it down to the transit room, and I'd switch it out for one of the fresh ones. And this went on until I finally got to the point where I had switched out every mattress in both the transit rooms. And then I said, you know, maybe I got a problem. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor's Dr. Gadd. He was this little Indian doctor that worked for the Army. And he said, "Oh, Sergeant, you have this problem. You have this problem. I'm going to give you some relaxation techniques and some medication because of your nervous condition." I was pickled by then. He had to know, but no, it is my nervous condition. And I worked on that for a long time. And then I really started getting into trouble. When I would get near a train station, I'd go into the Gaststätte, every train station in Germany has a restaurant, bar, you know, wine cellar. I'd go in, I'd get loaded, I'd go into a blackout, and I didn't know where I was going to wind up. I didn't know. One time I remember I'm sitting with this nice little Frenchman, and he offered me to have some wine with him, and we're drinking wine, and before I know it, I'm jumping over the table trying to choke him, and the police are coming, and I get on a train, and my last drunk lasted a good long time. I was somewhere on the French border. It lasted a good long time. I was just drunk. I was drunk for months on end. But one night I was out with a buddy of mine named Leonard, and we got stuck on the French border in a town called Saarbrücken. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning when we came out of a bar. The trains were dead. The trains didn't start up until early in the morning. So we're walking around, and you know, we find this place, and it's got this red neon light and a stairway going down, and there's music and laughter coming. So we go down there, and we walked into a room filled with the most beautiful women I'd ever seen in my life. These were Vogue fashion model, beautiful women. We walked down there, we were wasted. And the next thing you know, they're plying us with drinks. I got a beautiful brunette with her hand in my crotch. Leonard's sitting next to me. He's got his tongue down this girl's throat, trying to, you know, tickle her tonsils. And I'm looking at her milky white throat. And I'm looking, and all of a sudden I realize I'm looking at her Adam's apple bobbing up and down, and I'm going, "Len, Len, we got to get out of here. These are dudes. And I grabbed Len and he's like, no, man, it can't be. I'm like, Len, these are dudes. We were in a tranny bar. And, we went back and sat down. We wanted to be polite. Her hand goes back in my crotch. Len's going back down her throat. We were so wasted that it took us probably another 2 or 3 hours to get out of there, but we got out. And I wound up, back in the barracks, and I'm back out again. I told my sergeant major I needed to go for a dental appointment, and I disappeared for a couple of days, and I wound up on a train. I always wound up drunk on a train. I was terrified. Weekends were really tough because I never knew what was going to happen. But what really terrified me were the 3-day weekends. The 3-day weekends after payday were the worst because I didn't know where I was going to be on Monday. And after 3 days of bang, balls to the wall drinking, it was really hard to get straight again, to make it through the front gate in time for work on Tuesday morning. But there was a 3-day weekend coming up, and off I went. And I'm coming in and out of a blackout, and it's one of those blackouts. It's kind of like, it's like one of these Zoom squares where you're watching a black and white movie in slow motion, and you're the central character, but you're watching it removed from the action, and it's completely out of control. And I'm on a trans-European high-speed train, and I'm coming in and out of this blackout, and I'm at the doors of the train, which is going like 100 kilometers an hour. I'm trying to kick the fucking doors out so I can jump off. And the people are pulling me and slamming me down in the seat, and this big fat German sitting on top of me. I can still smell them. And I jump back up and I try and kick out, and they pull me down. And then I come out of the blackout. I'm sitting there, and I'm sitting in this seat, and I'm looking down at the floor, and I'm bawling. I am crying my eyes out. I am fucking terrified. And I'm looking at that perforated tread on that metal plate that's right by the exit doors. And I said the first erstwhile prayer I have ever said in my life. I said, God, please save me. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Please save me. And I went back into the blackout, and I came out of that blackout, and the doors were open, and I stepped down onto a cobblestone train platform, and I looked up, and it was as bright as day, and there's the clock, and it's 10:10 p.m., and above it is Kaiserslautern Hauptbahnhof. I had gotten off the train in my hometown train station, and I just looked up, and I threw my hands up, and I laughed at the sky, and I shouted out, okay, I got the message. And it was like gone, all of it. I walked across the street into a bar on the corner across from the Kaiserslautern train station. The Zum Goldener Pflug was the name of the bar, which incidentally, Zum Goldener Pflug in German means the golden plug. And I ordered 2 beers, and I didn't have any money to pay for them. And it was 10:10 p.m., September 19th, 1983. And I called my host family. I had a family that would invite me for Christmas, a German fellow named Klaus. And I called and I said, Klaus, this is John. I'm drunk. I'm at the Zum Goldener Pflug at the train station. I don't have any money. They want me to pay. Come pick me up. And he did. And he picked me up. And I remember him sitting in the car, and he's in the driver's seat, and he just looked over at me, and he just went like, bad boy. And I just felt humiliated. And he drove me back to my installation. And I wake up the next morning, and I'm wet, I'm cold. I open my eyes, and all I can see is a slit of light. And I thought, fuck, I finally did it. I'd read about like cases like this where alcoholics who drink themselves blind. And I was laid there on the floor, and I was in despair because I thought I drank myself blind. And then I realized that I'd passed out on the floor in my barracks room, and I was looking out into the hallway underneath my door. And I got up really relieved, and I put on my uniform, and I walked outside, and I walk into work. It's probably 3:30 in the morning, and I'm walking to work. My headquarters was about a mile and a half down Mannheimer Straße, down the road. And I'm still wasted, and I'm walking, and the whole time I'm walking along this gravel path on the side of this highway, I'm talking out loud to myself and I'm repeating over and over and over and over, who bit the donkey? Who bit the donkey? Who bit the donkey? Made no sense. I knew when I was saying it, it made no sense. I knew that I had lost my mind. My mind was gone. My mind was shot. I was out of my fucking skull. And I walked into the headquarters and I walked into the chief of staff's office and I sat behind his desk with the lights off. Now I'm a sergeant and the chief of staff's a colonel. I've been gone for a long time at my dental appointment. I think it was probably around 3 weeks. And at some point the lights flip on and Colonel Drudick's looking at me in the doorway and he's giving me the look and I started crying again. And I said, Colonel, I'm either psychotic or I'm an alcoholic. And I remember he just looked at me and he said, yup. And he called the duty driver and they sent me down to the Community Drug and Alcohol Counseling Center and waited with me until it opened up. And this really sweet lady took me in. Her name is Suzanne Rohde. I'm still in touch with her. I send her a Christmas card every year. She was the wife of an Air Force colonel and she was a clinical psychologist or social worker. And she did my intake interview. And I'm sitting in her desk and I'm bawling and I'm spilling my guts and telling her all of this. About halfway through, she's crying. She reaches over, she's like 45 years old. I'm 25. And she leans over and touches me on the leg and she says, John, are you making any of this up? And I said, no, I just started crying. And they sent me up to Landstuhl Army Regional Medical Center. And I'm sitting in front of a psychiatrist and I'm spilling the guts. And he says, oh, yes, you're an alcoholic. And he leaves the room. And a half an hour goes by and a nurse comes in. She says, where's Dr. So-and-so? And I said, he left about a half an hour ago. She said, God damn it, he was supposed to take you with him. So she takes me up and they admit me to 1 Delta, which is the psych unit. They took my belt. The guy says, you got to have your belt. I said, really? And he says, yeah, so you don't hurt yourself. I said, after what the fuck I've been through for the past 24 hours, I finally get here and you think I'm going to kill myself now? No. Anyway, so they put me on the Better Living Through Modern Chemistry program, Thorazine. That's some heavy shit, that is some heavy shit. I sat in an overstuffed chair on a psych unit in front of a television set for 3 days. And the only movie they had was this videotape called Beastmasters about this guy in a loincloth who talks to animals. And I watched it over and over for 3 days. To this day, I don't know what it was about. But one morning or one afternoon, this little guy comes in and he's got a fedora and he looks like a black Humphrey Bogart. And he says, does anybody want to go to an AA meeting? And I remember trying to get my hand up. And he just looked over at me and laughed and he said, I'll come get you tomorrow. And he did. I waited up all night for him. I waited up. I remember pacing in front of the night medic's desk, smoking cigarettes, because you had to go to the desk because they let you have cigarettes, but they didn't let you have a lighter. And he came and he got me, and they had me with an escort. His name was Charlie, and Charlie came, and they had an escort, a security officer, escort me. I had an IV in my left arm, I had an IV in my right arm, and they were on these wheeled poles. I weighed 102 pounds. I had jaundice. I was unable to speak in complete sentences, and I'd been diagnosed with a bunch of medical problems, but I'd been diagnosed with significant cognitive impairment. And I walked in, they walked me out through the gravel parking lot, around the building. We go to the back gate of Landstuhl Army Regional Medical Center. We go into the basement of the guard shack, and this girl with a couple of teeth missing looks at me and she says, hi, my name's Shelley. I'm an alcoholic and I haven't had a drink in 30 days. And I thought, oh, that's really, they sat me down and I listened to that meeting. And in that meeting was a man who had arrived in Germany the day before for a 2-week vacation to visit his son, Kevin, who was an airman at Ramstein Air Force Base. And his name was Philadelphia Bill Robinson. He was a 28 years sober, member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was from Glen Olden, Pennsylvania. And at the end of that meeting, I babbled something, I don't know, but at the end of that meeting, he came up to me and he grabbed me by the lapels of my hospital robe and he pulled me close. And he said, kid,
You don't ever have to drink again as long as you live, because you're an Alcoholics Anonymous now. You go to meetings, you get a sponsor, you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you work the 12 steps of this program, and you don't drink, even if your balls fall off, and things will happen to you beyond your wildest imagination, and all your dreams will come true.
And I believed him. And every day for 6 months, Philly Bill would pick me up. They transferred me to a medical ward, would pick me up from lounge stool, and he'd take me to a meeting. And he'd bring me back. And then when they let me go back to my unit, every day he'd show up, he'd take me to a meeting, we'd go out for coffee, he'd bring me back. He stayed for 6 months and he took care of me. And I would sit at the breakfast table with Bill at the snack bar, and I would complain, and I would be miserable, and he'd say,
Johnny, you're not telling yourself the truth. You didn't drink last night, did you?
No, Bill.
Then stop lying to yourself. You're going to be fine. It just takes time.
And he started teaching me about this concept. Like, he used to say,
if you don't pick up the first drink, you won't get drunk.
And I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I was fucking nuts. I didn't know what that meant. I couldn't, it was like some fucking mystery, but he stuck with me. And over time, you know, Bill left and Ramstein Charlie took me off. These guys were old school old timers. There wasn't nothing complicated about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Johnny, it's the first 164 pages. All you got to do is read one sentence and close the book, but underline it so you know tomorrow that you read it today.
They knew I was a mess, and they walked me through it, and they picked me up, and they took me to meetings. When I got back to my unit, when they discharged me from the hospital, I went back, and I remember I was really scared because I knew there was something waiting for me, and I walked into the colonel's office, and what Bill told me was, he said,
Johnny, when you go back to your unit, don't let anybody fuck with your sobriety. That's important. Don't let nobody fuck with your sobriety.
So I go into the chief of staff's office, and I'm expecting to get my ass reamed up. You know, there was something, I was looking at a court martial. It was something that my van, that I had this van that I drove around in, a military van that was issued to me with a secure phone and a conference table and chair. They found the van when I was gone, with a fat lady, an Asian girly boy, and a drugged German Shepherd that belonged to a colonel. And anyway, I was in trouble for, I don't know what happened, but I remember walking into the colonel's office and he said, well, you have some explaining to do. Welcome back. And I said, sir, I know I do, sir, but you know what, sir? My sponsor told me don't let anybody fuck with my sobriety. So, sir, with all due respect, sir, please do not fuck with my sobriety. He was just like, John, go back to the barracks. You can come to work tomorrow, use the van, go to your meetings, just take it easy. And they let me do my thing. And I stuck around. And I went to meetings, I went to meetings. I didn't miss a meeting. In the first 18 months of my sobriety, I didn't miss a meeting. Not one day did I go without a meeting. Some days, Saturdays and Sundays, I go to 2-3 meetings. We get in cars with these crazy drunks and they'd go to places and we'd go to meetings and we'd go to more meetings, and then we'd get done and they'd take me to the bowling alley and we'd smoke cigarettes and drink coffee until 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd go back to the barracks and bounce off the goddamn walls, read the big book, and we had cassette tapes of AA speakers. Back then, we didn't, you know, it was Dicoby Tapes was the name of the company. And I would listen to Ted Harbach and Clancy Imislund and Father Joseph Martin. Father Martin tapes were like platinum. And Father Martin, and I just listened to these things over and over. You only get, you know, it's trading. You only have one tape, and you'd listen to this tape over and over and over and over. And it was like, Bill used to say, Johnny, is like penicillin for a drunk. You just get filled up with it so that you're immune from that first drink. And I did my 4-step. I did 12, I don't know, between 8 and 12, you know, this thick of yellow legal pads. I wrote out my 4-step and I carried it in a locked briefcase that went with me wherever I went. And then right before I was getting ready to think about going back to the United States, I went to Ramstein. One of the guys in the program was a dependent husband of an Air Force officer, and he heard it was Christmas. It was between Christmas and New Year's of 1984. And it was a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And we started on a Friday afternoon, and we got done about 3 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. And I went outside after doing my 5th step with Rich. And I walked outside, and it was right before New Year's, and it was one of those perfect German Christmas time snowstorms. And I walked over to the edge of this field, and it was right next to the flight line. And there were lights on in the distance, and the snow was just coming down. And I walked out there, and I had not felt as clean and innocent and purified. I had never felt like that since I'd been a small child. And after that, I started paying more careful attention. I read through the whole big book several times, numerous times. I was able to read again. I decided I wanted to get out of the Army and go to college. And I remember I picked out a bunch of schools, and I applied to the ones that I was certain wouldn't admit me. And then they did. And I remember standing in the Ramstein speakers meeting one Saturday night, right before I was leaving. I was terrified of getting out of the Army and going back to the States. And I remember looking at Charlie and saying, "Charlie, I'm terrified." He said, "Why are you terrified?" I said, "Charlie, I don't know if I can make it and stay sober outside of the Army." And he looked at me and he said, "Johnny, if 325 million Americans can make it without the motherfucking Army, so can you." And just light went on. It's like, yeah, I can be successful. Then I got out, and I landed at Philadelphia airport, and I had to wait for a bus to get to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where the Army separation and transfer point was. And I come out of the gate at Philadelphia, I hear this, "Hey, Johnny!" And I look over, and there's this old man with this sign on his shirt. It says, "Somebody's got to fuck the fat ones." And it was Philly Bill. He picked me up, and he said, "Come on, you're going to stay with us for weeks and get your feet back." And he takes me out, and he throws me in the back of a car. He's got this car is falling apart. There's a big fat guy in the passenger seat in front. There are 3 spare tires in the back. He throws me on top of those. We go to his house. I met his brother, Sam. Sam was in the program too. Sam fell asleep like 25 years earlier one night with a cigarette, and he burned off his face, burned off his nose, burned off his ears, burned off his lips, burned off his fingers. And these 2 guys, Philly Bill and Sam, lived in a row house in Glen Olden, Pennsylvania, that was a drunk house. It was a 12-step house. It was their townhouse, but it was filled on a rotating basis for more than 30 years with young men who had come into the program to get sober in the program. Bill loved me, and he was the guy that made sure that I had an old timer, him, with me long enough to where I could start thinking again. And I went to college. I went to college, and I went to class. I read the books. I did the work. I took the test. I didn't give up. I went to meetings. I worked the steps. I had a sponsor. I didn't pick up a first drink. And I just did it one day at a time. I got done with college, and I applied to graduate school, and I went to graduate school and went to meetings, read the big book, got a sponsor, worked the steps. When I was going to graduate from college, I called Charlie in Germany, and I said, "Charlie, can you come?" He says, "No." I said, "Oh, I'll call Bill." I called Bill. I said, "Bill, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to get a degree." And he says, "Johnny, just remember, a degree is something they put on a rectal thermometer. Go to meetings, read the book, work the steps, don't drink even if your balls fall off. I told you, things will happen beyond your wildest imagination, and all your dreams will come true." Well, I went to grad school, and I decided I wanted to go to law school. I applied to law school, and I got admitted to law school. I remember walking into the University of Illinois College of Law the first day of class, and I had my books under my arm. And I looked at the metal letters on the wall, outside and it said University of Illinois College of Law, and I stopped, and it was almost, it was one of those moments, and I thought to myself, well, you're here. How the hell did you get here? And then I heard it in my ear, Chapter 5 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's how. And, I went to law school and practiced law. I retired from that, went into business, and over a period of years, I've got a beautiful wife. I've got 5 children. I've got a 30-year-old son, a 29-year-old son, 2 26-year-old girls, a 15-year-old girl, my wife. I've got a granddaughter who's 5 years old. Mother's Day, I found out I'm going to have another granddaughter from another one of my daughters. None of these people have ever seen me drink. Later on, I'd reconciled with my adoptive parents, and my wife and I supported them for the last 12 years of their lives. And one of the things that Bill had said, things will happen to you beyond your wildest imagination, kind of caught me. And when I was a kid, we all have these strange backgrounds. We all have these strange childhoods. And a lot of alcoholics, a lot of people in the program are adopted. But one of the things that always saved me when I was a kid were books. I had an aunt who would give me books. And one of the books she gave me, I was 8 or 9 years old, and one of the books she gave me was this book. It was called From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. And it was about a little boy who lived in Manhattan, who escaped from his parents and moved into the Metropolitan Museum of Art with his sister. And they lived in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And every night they would come out and they would go through the exhibits. And it was just it was a wonderful story about this child escaping from his family. When I was a child, that book, it helped me survive mentally, because I used to have this fantasy that someday I was going to find my mother and that she and I were going to go through the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Anyway, so I reconcile it, and this does fit in here. I didn't go into a meaningless digression, but before my adoptive father died, one night I had him in the hospital, and we'd reconciled, and he asked me to get something out of his wallet, and I got his wallet, and he pulled out a piece of paper and he handed it to me. And it was a combination. I said, "What is this?" He said, "In the house, up in the attic, in the floorboards, there's a vault box. Get it out of there before anybody finds it." And I did. After he'd been dead about 6 months, my wife finally asked me, I had it upstairs next to my desk in my study. She said, "Are you ever going to open it?" And I opened it. It was my original adoption papers. And I found my birth mother, and I sent her an email, and she responded. Anyway, she flew to Chicago, and we're very, very close. But a couple of years ago, I told her this story, and I told her about the book, The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. And she never read it. So I sent her a copy, and she read it. And I said, I said, I had this fantasy when I was a little kid that someday I was going to find you and that we were going to go to New York and go through the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And she said, "Didn't I ever tell you my policy?" And I'm like, "No, Mom, what's your policy?" And she said, "Fuck yes." Well, she got on a plane, I got on a plane, my kids got on a plane, my wife and I got on a plane, we went to New York. My mom and I, the other kids went out somewhere, and my mom and I, we spent the day and we walked through the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So what Bill said about if you go to meetings, you read the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you get a sponsor, you work the 12 steps of the program, you don't pick up that first drink, things will happen to you beyond your wildest imagination, and all your dreams will come true. It's real. And these men that sponsored me and who have always led me into the program, these were old timers, and these were guys who really walked the walk. These guys were rough drinking alcoholics. And when they came into the program, they created lives for themselves based on the principles in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And they talk the talk, but they walk the walk. And that's what really got me into this program. I heard somebody the other night say that he thought he'd give AA a try. When I walked into that AA meeting in September of 1983, I didn't come to give AA a chance. AA was the last grasp that I could make towards living, because I was surely going to die. And I think that my higher power that night on that train looked down on me and said, I had better intervene and save this one, because he is really sick and he is going to die, and I have better things in store for him. And these sponsors that I had, you ever see these equestrian riders, these the horse riders in competitions, how they sit on a horse and everything moves just so gracefully, and it's just this beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. It's this flawless, flowing execution that seems so natural. That's what these guys are like. That's what these guys were like. They wore their sobriety like a crown. And their example is what gave me hope that I could go from a 14-year-old living in a dumpster, peddling his ass on the streets of Chicago, to a life with morals, values, principles, responsibility, that I would learn to be responsible for my own actions, and that I would learn that after I'd gotten sober, it was my responsibility to do the simple work that's in this book, and that it would bear rewards. So for the newcomer, for young people, I know there's some young people here who are in the treatment centers, the Barb B and Company, and I can't screen. I'm technical. I'm not a Luddite, but I know there are a lot of young people in the sober living centers up there. I gotta tell you, I remember my first couple months of sobriety like it was yesterday. And it was all so mysterious. It was all so complicated. My life was so fucked up. My head was so twisted that when I looked at these old guys and they told me these things, the only option I had was to believe that what they were telling me was true, and that the answers were in the first 164 pages of this book. And the people in this program, the men in this program, the people in the meetings in this program have saved my life and have made all of my dreams come true. All of my dreams come true. I am living a life today that if you would have told me what my life would be like today back then, I would have truly thought that I needed serious psychiatric institutionalization on a permanent basis, because this kind of life was just not an option for me. I'm running out of time. I'd like to share something. As I've gone through the book year after year, I get caught in certain spots once in a while. I've been through it, and every part at one point or another throughout my life has been my favorite part. And lately, there's a part that I'd like to read to you. It's in the 4th edition, but it's in the 3rd edition. It's in a story called It Might Have Been Worse, and it's page 382 and 383 of my 3rd edition. And this is how it goes. And this is my story. I identify with this. I was desperately in earnest to follow through and understand what was expected of me as a member of AA, and to take each step of the 12 as rapidly as possible. To me, this meant telling my associates that I had joined Alcoholics Anonymous, that I didn't know what was expected of me by AA, but that whatever it was the most important thing in my life for me, that sobriety meant more to me than anything in this world. It was so important that it must come ahead of anything. There are many short phrases and expressions in AA which make sound sense. First things first, solving our immediate problems before we try to solve all the others and get muddled in our thinking and doing. Easy does it, but do it, damn it. No, relax a little. Try for inner contentment. No one individual can carry all the burdens of the world. Everyone has problems. Getting drunk won't solve them. 24 hours a day, today's the day, doing our best, living each day to the fullest is the art of living. Yesterday is gone, and we don't know whether we will be here tomorrow. If we do a good job of living today, and if tomorrow comes for us, then the chances are we will do a good job when it arrives. So why worry about it? The AA way of life is the way we always should have tried to live. The AA way of life is the way we always should have tried to live. Grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. These thoughts became part of our daily lives. They're not ideas of resignation, but of the recognition of certain basic facts of living. The fact that AA is a spiritual program didn't scare me or raise any prejudice in my mind. I couldn't afford the luxury of prejudice. I had tried my way and had failed. When I joined AA, I did so for the sole purpose of getting sober and staying sober. I didn't realize I would find so much more, but a new and different outlook on life started opening up almost immediately. Each day seems to be so much more productive and satisfying. I get so much more enjoyment out of living. I find an inner pleasure in simple things. Living just for today is a pleasant adventure. Above all, I am grateful to AA for my sobriety, which means so much to my family, friends, and business associates, because God and AA were able to do for me something I was unable to do for myself. To the newcomer, I found a way of life in this program that gave me a life. It was something that was unearned, and it was something that is beyond any kind of explanation or description I can give you. If you go to meetings, if you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, if you get a sponsor and you work through the 12 steps of the program and you don't pick up that first drink, no matter what, you don't pick up that first drink, things will happen to you beyond your wildest imagination. All your dreams will come true. It just takes time, and it will happen to you. Thank you for letting me share. Thanks everybody for coming to the meeting. I wish I was up in Prescott with you. I'll be up there again soon, but thanks for letting me share. It's such a pleasure. You have such good AA up there. I go to the Serenity at Sunrise. I go to the Toolbox group. I got, you've got, when I come up to visit, you've got such great AA up there. I'm looking forward to 2.5, 3 years when I retire for the third time and last time. We're relocating up to Prescott, and that's where we're going to make our permanent home. You got great AA up there. You got great meetings. You got lots of great possibilities for sponsorship. A lot of great men and women in the program up there. And the newcomers and your kids that are in these sober living places, just keep punching. It just takes time. Thanks so much for letting me share tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And